Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do.
But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy.
They're just gonna remember some guys now.
3-2. No, he's calling the pitch clock. The pitch clock violation is going to end the game. Jake Cave scores. Rockies win 8-7. Finnegan doesn't even remember that guy. The show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players, past and present. Hey there, folks. It's me, one of your hosts, James, and there's no limit on the time that I have to spend with you all today.
It could, in theory, just like a baseball game, go on forever. This may be the podcast that never ends. I'd be thrilled to share that honor with you, James, but it wouldn't be just us because there is our special guest. He is the man who has perhaps a method to defy the space-time continuum. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, it's me, John Isner. You know, it was, 10 years ago or whatever that I had that 100-hour game that they had to change the law against to make sure that no one could do that again.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? It was 70-68 in the final set, and it's like just one less game each, guys. That's all we needed.
If you haven't seen the Andy Samberg masterpiece, 7 Days in Hell, also starring Jon Snow himself, Kit Harington, cannot recommend it highly enough, nor can I recommend the spiritual sequel, Tour de Pharmacy, enough, the cycling-based one. Both absolute bangers. Speaking of bangers, Xavier, you're back from Japan, and I hope you brought some memories with you.
Yeah, Japan's great. It's the best. I love it very much. I did at one point watch a Yankees-Orioles game on my phone in a coin-operated laundromat in Kitahama. But other than that, I was not watching a lot of sports while there because I was busy doing other things. But there are a couple things that I have seen since I got back that I have very much enjoyed. The one I really want to shout out is that Bill Barnwell put out a story yesterday on ESPN talking about how in England, a country that he calls the size of Ohio, there are 92 professional clubs across the first 5 divisions of their soccer pyramid. And he wanted to figure out, well, if England can support 92 professional soccer clubs, and essentially more for the ones that are not in the professional divisions, what if he made a 100-team NFL? It is one of the funniest reads I've ever seen, and only 3 states do not get their own teams.
I was going to say, you gotta feel like a real piece of shit if you don't at that point.
I want to see if you guys can guess the 3 states that do not get their own teams.
Do the Dakotas, split one?
No, the Dakotas get 2.
Actually, Dakotas get 2?
The Dakotas get 3, I'm sorry.
What the fuck?
So hold on, can you just state again, what are the qualifications of a franchise here, essentially?
So this is exactly what he said. Let's lay out some ground rules and the logic I used in trying to make this work. No NFL teams are disappearing as part of this exercise. The 32 franchises sticking around, though several will need to make decisions about where they play versus where they represent. Teams that have stadiums outside the area they purport to represent will either need to move to where they're supposed to be or change their name and let someone else move in to take their place. No team holds any territorial rights. If someone wants to finance a professional team in Fort Worth and compete with Cowboys fans, they can. New cities and franchises were selected on a variety of factors. Large population centers, whether they had access to an existing football stadium and a history of supporting football. And is it in a place where you have a chance of actually getting new fans or changing the allegiances of older fans?
Okay. So with that being the subtext, and there's how many states that didn't get teams?
3 didn't.
3 did not. So
3 did not.
Delaware?
I was gonna Delaware. I feel like is one that doesn't get a team.
Delaware does not get a team.
Yeah.
This is outrageous slander, and let me just say, is teeing me up very nicely for our main course a little bit later. But more on that later. Delaware, I would have guessed. Rhode Island?
Rhode Island does not.
One more. Because like anything that's big, you got to figure that's too much territory to not throw a dart at the map. Got to be at least one in Alaska. Got to be at least one in Hawaii. I'm going to go with Wyoming. I'm going to say Wyoming. I know it's a big chunk of land, but like...
I'm going to say Connecticut.
No, Connecticut does get a team. Hartford gets a team, and Wyoming also gets a team. Wyoming gets a team in Laramie.
Okay. Are they the Laramie Cigarettes?
I mean, they could be. They didn't give names.
So. Yeah, I don't know, man. What's number 3?
Vermont. Vermont does not get a team.
I would have thought they'd be a shoo-in for like Lumberjacks or something.
Nope, Vermont does not get a team. Also, the one sentence about Delaware is Delaware's small size and proximity to Philadelphia make it Eagles country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're not an Eagles fan, then you're a Ravens fan. And if you're neither of those, then you're probably a Washington fan. Like
Alabama gets 3 teams, though. So Delaware gets nothing, Alabama gets 3 teams.
Dude, this injustice. It will be rectified later. Yeah.
West Virginia gets a team, too. So, good for West Virginia. Pennsylvania does not get a 3rd team. Pennsylvania sticks with just the Eagles and the Steelers.
That's fair. They should.
I can't wait for the Jackson, Mississippi versus Mobile, Alabama game. That's going to be my favorite.
This fucking Delaware erasure.
Well, Diaz, if there's no new team making memories for Delaware, what is making memories for you right now?
So, we're right around the corner from Olympic season. And what that means is that we are in Olympic qualifier season. And just want to make sure like we're all aware that this exists. You can just go on YouTube at basically any time of day and type in Olympic qualifiers. And there's going to be some events that are live at any given moment for Olympic qualifying at somewhere around the world. Sunday, probably around about noon, I was settling in and I discovered this. And I spent the next 5 hours watching various rock climbing qualifications. And like,
shit, yeah.
Like, it's not just rock climbing. Like, they have all these different disciplines within it. Like, there's like the standard rock climbing. There's like sport climbing. There's like 2 other kinds that I forget the names of. But the names
also there are just people like racing rock climbing. It could just be that.
That's sometimes all it has to be. And like the one I saw was like, they were showing the straight on horizontal camera angle, like a 2D, like Mario almost, if you will, where you're like, oh wow, like this looks like a little tough. And then they switch the perspective so that it's now straight on from the side. And you're like, oh wait, these people are also climbing backwards while scaling this fucking thing.
It's also like an obtuse angle.
Dude, it's gnarly. Like there are people literally like digging their fingernails in the crevices and hanging on by their fingernails to like create leverage. Unreal. And rock climbing is what featured for me on Sunday. At any given moment. In fact, like let's look right now. What right now as we record has Olympic qualifiers happening?
Love this.
Okay, there don't seem to be any happening right now. But that's just a coincidence.
Devastating.
At almost all times, there are some form of Olympic qualifiers happening. They were live earlier today with the breakdancing competition. That would have been a good one. And we should be watching them. We should be enjoying them and maybe getting a little edge ahead of the Olympics if you're of the betting mind. That person.
No, now you ruined it, Diaz.
I'm just saying. There's something for everybody. For the genuine sportsman and the degenerate gambler. There's something for everybody.
This segment is brought to you by Sportsbook. With Olympic season here in Baltimore, we have a Olympic water sports history, of course, with Michael Phelps, with Katie Ledecky. In other water sports, recently, the Orioles, the last couple of years, like they've worked a lot of water celebrations in, doing the sprinklers on extra base hits, the hydration station, the homer hose, the dong bong. We can all call it what it is. But there was another aquatic pastime that Baltimore engaged in this past weekend. That was the Baltimore Harbor Splash 2024. So I want to tell you guys about this. It is maybe a little bit of a stretch to call it sports, but since 2010, Baltimore Waterfront Partnership has been working towards a swimmable harbor. They've been pushing a lot of cleaning efforts. There's this thing they call Mr. Trash Wheel. It's basically a big floating barge that has a wheel churning at all times to remove litter from the harbor. There's a couple now in our harbor, and it's been copied over the West Coast. So all of this, it was supposed to culminate with a big swimming event in 2020. That didn't happen. But finally, this past weekend, so on June 23rd, 2024, we had Harbor Splash 2024. They opened up 150 spots for people to jump in and swim in the Baltimore Inner Harbor. Sold out in 10 minutes. And plenty more than 150 people were on hand there. The mayor was there to jump in, the state comptroller, Mr. Splash, who has been kind of a secondary mascot for the Orioles with those water celebrations the last couple seasons. So all of them were there. We've got a quote here from the banner from someone who's participating. It would be absurd to miss this opportunity to celebrate the rejuvenation of the harbor, which is at the core of Baltimore. That quote, let me see here. That is from one of the participants, James Lensweiler. In case you don't think that I use all of my $5 words in like real life, goddamn right I do, because my wife and I did get to participate. We were two of those 150 people. I did get in there. It was really delightful. Water felt great. Really nice turbidity, which is the clarity of the water. We could see our feet in it. And the reason that I wanted to like talk about this and making memories is because it really was a celebration of civic pride in a way that sports also functions. And Baltimore is just like, I was getting very, very emotional about the city. And it is a city that is just so ready to celebrate itself at any time. Like since the Orioles have gotten better, like the season is over right now with 4 season-ending injuries to the pitching staff. They're going to make a wild card and like, that's great. They will still celebrate that because Baltimore is just so ready to jump at any chance it gets to celebrate anything. And it was great. Apparently the picture of my wife and I and Mr. Splash did make the Masson broadcast during one of the Orioles-Astros games. Don't check out anything else about the game. But we've had to push this recording back a little bit. There was someone who made this a little bit more athletic. This is something that the two of you have had alluded to. This Harbor Splash was paired with an effort by Katie Pumphrey, who is a local ultramarathon swimmer in addition to being an artist. She, at 3:19 a.m. this morning, jumped into the water by Sandy Point State Park, which is right by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and began swimming 24 miles down the Chesapeake Bay into the Patapsco River, into the Baltimore Inner Harbor. We were able to track it throughout the day, and I was happy to be on hand as we all then waited there in the harbor. She kept it just under 14 hours. She made it in like 13:55, 56 or something. Winds really slowed her down there at the end, but goddamn, it was incredible to be there and see this person who was being escorted by the aforementioned Mr. Trash Wheel and by this really like chintzy pirate motor ship that you can rent in the city of Baltimore that shoots people with water guns. It's very dumb. It was incredibly Baltimore, and it was just delightful to be at both of these just beautiful outpourings of civic pride over this natural resource that is, as that person in the banner said, you know, really at the core of the city and always has been. And goddamn, do I love Baltimore. So that is what is making memories for me.
That's fantastic and a beautiful moment for the city of Baltimore. Whenever I hear now about like ultra marathon people, where my mind goes is because I compare it to how radically different like short distance sprinters are. And the question that comes to mind is, remind me again, I'm sorry, the name of the swimmer.
Katie Pumphrey.
Katie Pumphrey.
Yeah.
What is the first distance at which Katie Pumphrey would beat Katie Ledecky in a race?
Ooh, I feel like a mile. Because you're right, that isn't like, there is a big lead that builds, and then it is just a war of attrition. I think Ledecky's supposed to tire out around a mile or so.
It's just a fascinating principle almost. Because like, it's not a precise distance, but it's like a rough distance in which that overtake would happen. We like this is the kind of thing we should be funding in non-Olympic years.
This just reminds me of the tweet I saw that was, what's the youngest age that you could beat LeBron in basketball? It was
along those lines.
You're not going to beat 10-year-old LeBron, but could you beat 7-year-old LeBron? Or would you have to just beat 3-year-old LeBron? What is the earliest age of LeBron that you could beat?
5 is the least. Because like I, having been, you know, many times summer camp counts or things like that, I know that normal kids, I can beat them till about 10. And at 10, my height stops being enough of an advantage. So I'm going to subtract 5 years for him being LeBron James.
I'll add the 5 back on for the fact that I play like twice a week. So I'll say I can take 10-year-old LeBron.
Look at you taking it to 10-year-old LeBron.
The thing, because like I feel like at 10, he's far more skilled than I am. But I feel like I'd still be able to post him. And then like I feel like once you get to like 5th grade LeBron, like he's probably getting close to dunking by that point. Like at that point, I'm out.
Maybe you could do it with the right person on the sidelines there for you. And that is my bald-faced attempt to transition now into what you have already been sprinkling some stuff in here. I guess we're heading to the first state, if I'm not mistaken.
We are going to make it to the first state. But first, allow me to just tee up this category.
Sure,
general.
yes, please.
Because it's not Delaware-specific, the category. But we spend the majority of our episodes remembering the athletes on the field. And when we delve into the sidelines, we're usually focusing on the head coach. But we've never made it a point to specifically give love to the guys behind the guys, that being the assistant coaches. So this week, we want to focus on assistant coaches. And for me, very excited as a college football fan. There's a lot of juice in the college football world this summer, because it is the first time in 11 years that EA Sports is renewing their college football video game series, and it's a long time coming. I'm one of the millions of fans already looking forward to that release, but I'm probably one of the very few who is already looking forward to next year's release, because next year, University of Delaware Fighting Blue Hens are making the move up to the FBS division and will make their, not debut in the game. They used to have FCS teams in there. But for the first time in like basically 20, 25 years, and for certainly the first time with the Delaware fights on in, the actual Delaware Stadium in there, it's going to be amazing.
Are they going to have a wall you can piss on?
I sure hope they do. And for those who don't know, the men's bathroom at the University of Delaware football stadium, it's just a wall that has plumbing.
What I love is that's the exact same as the University of Penn, but the University of Penn made theirs like a fancy marble wall with like gold inlay.
Right. Penn tried to make it fancy, and Delaware embraced like, look, it's a fucking wall and you pee on it, and it all goes somewhere eventually. I certainly hope that would be a great, like, you know, when they do cutaways to break, and it's like, oh, we're in Philadelphia. Here they are making a cheesesteak. Oh, we're here in Delaware. Here's some guys pissing on a wall.
Just pixels.
It was a real rite of passage the first time I was allowed to pee on the wall. It was an incredible tradition. But, you know, that bathroom will be located at Tubby Raymond Field, so named for the legendary head coach at the University of Delaware, Harold Tubby Raymond. Tubby Raymond obviously gets a ton of credit throughout the college football world for being one of the few coaches to reach 300 wins all at one institution. Specifically, when we get more into the minutia of the game, he is credited for the incredible success of the Delaware wing T offense. But Tubby Raymond would be the first to tell you he's not the only one that deserves credit for that. He may have written the book, but he wants to give credit to his co-author. And this is a literal book, and this is his literal co-author. We're talking about the longtime offensive coordinator for the Delaware Blue Hens, Ted Kempski.
Ted Kempski?
Ted Kempski. Kempski.
Okay,
Kempski.
Gotcha.
So my first introduction to the incredible Ted Kempski wing T offense was actually at 1 day old, because I was born November 27th, 1992. It was on November 28th, 1992, that my whole family gathered around the radio. They had season tickets. Delaware was at home for the first round of the playoff, but, you know, my birth, first of my grandmother's children, I was the first grandchild. It was a big thing. So we're still going to listen to the game, though. So we're all gathered around the radio, and Delaware is running this wing T offense, which, just to explain it as briefly as I can, it is an incredibly complex offense, but it's a system based on fakes, reverses, pulling linemen, a lot of actions that look the same at the snap, but this time I'm giving it to the fullback. Next time I'm tossing it out. The next time we're faking the toss and I'm reversing back the other way. A lot of complex fakes coming off of that. Delaware on this afternoon, while welcoming, I should mention as well, Terry Bowden, the son of Bobby Bowden, as the head coach of those Stanford Bulldogs. Delaware piles up 387 yards on the ground, and a testament to how the offense is so based on spreading the ball around. The leading rusher for Delaware had 116 yards on that day, while the team runs for 387. You also got 199 more in the air from Bill Vergantino, who also ran for 84 yards himself as the quarterback. For 586 total yards, Delaware puts up, while setting the program record of 56 points in a 56-21 win. For reference, Samford played Auburn that year. Auburn only put up 55. And the Wayne T's out here putting up 56. So at just one day old, I already knew all about this Ted Kempski offense and how good it is. But for Ted Kempski, it goes all the way back to the turn of the decade, the 30s into the 40s. We don't know his exact birthday. It's not available online anywhere. But that's roughly when he was born in Wilmington, Delaware. We do know that Theodore Kempski was born to parents Theodore and Margaret. And we do know that young Theodore had a sister named Margaret. Very creative family, the Kempskis.
A lot of juniors in there.
A lot of juniors. And we know that he went to Salesianum, which is a Catholic school in the northern Delaware area. And they're known today for being by far the preeminent school in almost every sport in Delaware for boys athletics. But back in the late 50s, that legacy was not established yet. And it wasn't until young Teddy took over as the starting quarterback his junior year. He was able to take the team in his senior year to their first undefeated season and the state title. For his efforts in his senior year, he's named to multiple All-American teams. And he was also named the starter for the blue team in the Blue Gold All-Star game, which is the Delaware football high school game between the blue representing the north, the gold representing the south. Ted Kempski won MVP in that game. So extremely decorated for his senior season. Of course, he has an offer to stay local and play for Dave Nelson at the University of Delaware. But he instead goes to Virginia, thanks to the scholarship offer from Don Shula.
Ooh.
He, of course, of the 72 Dolphins. And of the Baltimore Colts, of course. A legend of the game, recognizing this young talent and deciding to bring him in. But for Ted, it doesn't work out so well at Virginia. His freshman year on the freshman team doesn't get a lot of playing time. He doesn't really see a path going forward. So for sophomore year, transfers back to Delaware, sits out a year. He, as the junior, becomes the starting quarterback for Dave Nelson and as the primary cog in this, at the time, nascent Wayne T offense. Dave Nelson brought it to Delaware, but it's still in early concept era, if you will. 1961, his junior year, Delaware starts out 3-0, and they're ranked 5th in the country for the college division, which is the modern equivalent of the 1AA FCS. But after that 3-0 start, they stumble. They go 1-4 the rest of the way, and they finish 4-4. In 1962, as a senior, they again start out 3-0. They again drop their next two games to Buffalo and Villanova. Their season's at a crossroads, but they win 4 straight. They finish 7-2, including wins over Rutgers and Temple, both representing the university division. So going up a division, knocking off these two stronger programs. They win the MAC Conference Championship, 1A, to be clear. And they also win the Lambert Cup, which is kind of just an award that's voted on for the best small college among the East Coast. So he goes out a conference champion. He goes out a several qualifiers national champion, regional champion, I guess.
Sectional, super regionals. I know. I just want to say I love the Lambert Cup. I love, hey, here's one for the little guys.
And specifically just the little guys on the East Coast. And like the Lambert Cup continued to exist. Like it might even still exist. I know as recently as like when I graduated high school.
Hell yeah.
When I was like really paying attention to Delaware still. It was still a thing. So finishes up his senior year, 1962, in Delaware. And important to note that along the way, he was a very good student as well. Had the highest GPA of anybody on the football team. While he secured his bachelor's, he wanted to stay at Delaware to pursue his master's. And as long as he was there, Dave Nelson figured it'd be great to still have him in the locker room. So he makes him a graduate assistant. Spends the next 3 years as a GA for Delaware. And with his master's earned, he wanted to stick out on his own. Didn't go so well the first time when he went to Virginia, but maybe things can go well away from Delaware. Spends 2 years as an assistant at George Washington University before he goes to Marshall College in Virginia. And in his lone season there, they went winless and they fired every single staff member afterwards. For good reason. At this point, Ted is debating just going into the real world. Football's been good to me, but it's time to become an adult. But he gets a call from Tubby Raymond. Tubby was the offensive coordinator when Dave Nelson was the head coach, but he took over in 1966, and he had a staff opening. So he figured, why not bring back Ted? Ted accepted. After just 1 year as an assistant, Tubby realizes the brilliant offensive mind he has. And so for the 1969 season, very nice, Ted Kempski is promoted to offensive coordinator.
It's a very nice omen to start the career.
It's an incredibly nice omen to start the career. And Delaware does all right the first 2 years, but in his third season is when they really take off, with him continuing to adapt and revolutionize this wing T offense. In 1971, Delaware averages 44 points a game en route to a 10-1 record. Their only loss coming 32-27 to Temple, again representing that higher division. They claimed the small college national championship by virtue of their number 1 ranking in the AP poll. But for good measure, they also accepted a bid to the Boardwalk Bowl. The Boardwalk Bowl was played in Atlantic City at the AC Convention Center. What they sought to do was find the 2 best, again, small schools on the East Coast and pit them against one another. Delaware already has their national championship secured, but they go to play in the Boardwalk Bowl, going against CW Post, which today is essentially LIU. They give up 22 points, but they score 72 en route to a 50-point shellacking to remove all doubt that they are the finest of the small schools across the whole land.
You know there was an unnecessary field goal in there.
Or miss 3 more extra points. Like, have some fun. Coming back for 1972, the offense falls off a little bit. From that 44 game, it goes to 35.5, but they avenge their lone loss with a 28-9 win over Temple, and they run the table 10-0 for another undefeated season and consecutive national titles. Now, at risk of getting too into the minutia of the season by season, I want to focus specifically on the wing T offense and how it is an example of the brilliance of Ted Kempski. First of all, an excerpt from a person who's a much better writer than me, Jeff Pearlman, when he wrote his ode to the wing T offense for The Athletic. As a 1994 University of Delaware graduate who spent much of his college time covering the Blue Hens for the student newspaper, I came to know and love the wing T as few knew and loved it. The run-oriented offense, featuring a quarterback and generally 2 backs behind them and another back hovering behind the tackle, was a whirling dervish of slants, cuts, curls, motions, twists, and befuddling misdirection. One could watch a play unfold, then see it again on replay and still not be sure what the heck just happened. Did the quarterback keep the ball? Did he slip it to the fullback? Did the halfback grab it? The whole system was a blurry cocktail of Harry Houdini, stirred with Roadrunner, stirred with Bill Vergantino. Bill Vergantino. That's the name I said earlier. That's the name I knew when I was 1 day old. I want to focus on 3 quarterbacks that ran the wing team. We'll start with Bill Vergantino. The prototypical, if you just draw it up, what are the absolute characteristics that I need to run this offense? Bill Vergantino is all of them to a T. He's just under 6 foot, 180 pounds soaking wet, but he's able to process all of the multiple reads that you need to make to successfully run this offense very quickly. And if the ultimate decision is that he keeps it himself, he is also a demon in the open field. He didn't have the best arm. He threw 46 interceptions across his career, which is still a program record at Delaware. And he only once eclipsed 2,000 yards passing in a season. But he does still hold the program record for rushing yards by a quarterback. And he was the only quarterback in the entire time that Ted Kempski was there to start all 4 years. That shows when you get the perfect prototypical quarterback, Ted Kempski is going to mold him into fine iron and make him the absolute best he can be.
I think that speaks well to like some loyalty for your guy.
Oh, that as well, exactly. To not mind the interceptions because, hey, that's what I coached you to do, and you made the pass and it got intercepted. That's on me. So to trust him through all those 4 years, I agree. We have the small, tiny guy who's like perfectly designed to run this specific offense and no other offense in college football. On the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have the big arm prospect that quite simply is not fast enough and not enough of an athlete to be able to run this offense. When you're talking about this end of the spectrum, you're talking about Matt Nagy. Of course, we all know the former head coach of the Chicago Bears, the current offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs.
History's greatest victim of the double doink.
Incredible reaction of his face afterwards. True disbelief. But in the late 90s, he was just a big-armed, slow-footed quarterback out of Mannheim Central. And when he first arrived to Delaware's campus, the first thing Ted Kempski said to him is, "Son, I think you came to the wrong school." But after a couple practices, he very quickly realized, like, this is a very special talent that I have. He's not the best for my offense, but we really have something here. So rather than go forward and try to jam the square peg that is Matt Nagy into the round hole that is the wing T offense, he went on a nationwide tour, speaking with any offensive mind that he could get to sit down in the room with him and saying, look, I have my team that's coached on this wing T offense. What are some more vertical passing concepts that we can essentially translate from your offense to make it work into my offense so that we can unlock this incredible talent that we have? Now, what are the results? Matt Nagy still holds the career passing yards record at Delaware with 8,214 yards. You'll remember a guy named Joe Flacco came through. He did not surpass that. His 265.1 yards per game in 1998 are only eclipsed in a season by Joe Flacco in 2007, who ran, again, that contemporary no-huddle shotgun offense under Casey Keeler. So presumably many more opportunities to throw, but Nagy being very efficient. His two highest passing output games, 556 yards against UConn and 456 yards against Villanova, are still the two highest single-game outputs in program history. This, again, is done ostensibly in a run-first offense.
Yeah, like that's an amount that I would be embarrassed to have hung on me by a team that has two dedicated backs behind the quarterback at all time. Minimum. Because sometimes you said you've got the other one.
Right, exactly. The wing back as well. And, I mean, that just shows, again, when he gets a talent that could not have less of the ideal skill set, he's going to still find a way to maximize it within his wing T concepts. I mean, those are like the first Delaware teams that I remember watching was Matt Nagy throwing to Eddie Conti was his number one receiver, who caught, I believe it was 350 of those receiving yards against UConn. So like,
God,
it was
that 350 receiving yards, I think is almost more impressive than 500 plus passing yards.
Yeah, Eddie Conti, just briefly, because he's like, he might be the greatest athlete I've ever seen on a football field. He won every conference track championship as well, while being this like incredible receiver, like Tyreek Hill without beating his wife and children. Okay, so now we can establish this, right? We have on the one end of the wing T quarterback spectrum, we have Bill Vergantino, great mind for it. Tiny little guy, couldn't run any other offense, but he's great for this one. And on the other hand, we have Nagy, no prerequisite skills that you would ever want in a wing T offense, but god damn it, he's a quarterback that can throw, and I'm going to take advantage of it. If we consider this Vergantino-Nagy spectrum, I think right in the middle of it would be a guy that preceded both of them, and that's going to be Rich Gannon.
Always forget Rich Gannon also went to Delaware, man.
Well, and like, let's also just say from the jump, Rich Gannon will someday get his own presentation in this podcast because
For sure.
he absolutely has his own guy credentials. And from the top view, starting from Delaware and being a sleeping giant and eventually becoming the NFL MVP in like your 15th season is insane. But when we're focusing on the college part of that, people forget that Rich Gannon was such a great athlete coming out of Delaware that the Patriots drafted him to play running back. People forget that. And then he ended up with the Vikings because he said, I'm only going to be a quarterback. And then he got traded there. Right from the jump, Gannon, guy credentials. But when he's at Delaware, he's the epitome of a dual threat. His senior year, he threw for 2,795 passing yards in the true wing T. So basically you can double that to put it in context of how many yards he threw for. He also runs for 16 touchdowns that season. It set the record for quarterbacks at Delaware, only to be eclipsed by one by Bill Vergantino 10 years later. These kind of numbers don't do it justice. Like, there are Rich Gannon highlights on YouTube from his time at Delaware. I highly encourage you to look it up because it is a lot of deft ball handling and running, but it's also a lot of what your annoying friend would do with Mike Vick in like Madden 04. Just running around and you can't catch me, and eventually, oh, that guy's a little open now. Boom, touchdown.
It feels like people forget that Rich Gannon was a problem. That's
Rich
what it feels like
Gannon-
you're saying to me.
Rich Gannon was multiple problems, and those problems were written by Ted Kempski. Maximize the talent out of Rich Gannon, which he obviously had immense talent. I'm not saying that he didn't, but the reason I bring up Gannon is because Gannon is like the perfect merging of those two ends of what he's able to do. Whatever quarterback you put in front of him, he's going to find whatever concepts can work within the wing T offense, and he's going to get the most out of the talent that he has while still adhering to the systems that he has instilled, which I think is just a hallmark of a great coach. When you hear about this and you hear about these adjustments that he can make with these three wildly different quarterbacks who all still have immense success in the offense, your natural question is, so why didn't he ever become a head coach? The fact is he never really wanted to. And to hear it from Ted himself, quote, sure, I would have liked to be a head coach, but I always felt that my position at Delaware was more prominent than the head coaching job at many other schools. I'm grateful to the University of Delaware for allowing me to work with such a great institution.
Basically, UD is different.
We different over here. And like, it really was that partnership and that loyalty that he had to Delaware that I think makes his coaching career so impressive. But while he was loyal to Delaware, he wasn't insular to Delaware. At a time when football strategy is being revolutionized across the board, we have the shotgun offenses are starting to emerge at this time. You have the wing T offense. And so many coaches are holding tight to their playbooks and their philosophies. Ted Kempski would travel the country in the offseason, teaching the concepts of his offense. And he gained the reputation like option offense Mike Leach is kind of what the reputation that I gathered from just some of these small anecdotes. There's a few that were on Twitter that I had to go digging for, but there's one on a thread of coaches that are just recounting stories from clinics. And John Talley, who, if I found the right guy, I think he was an O-line coach at like Southwest Louisiana. I'm not sure if he's still coaching, but the story he tweeted, he said, Ted Kempski presenting to sessions in Lafayette, Louisiana. He'd draw and talk nonstop while drawing. When he finished with the explanation, he'd drag the acetate off the overhead and say to himself, now that's a beautiful play. In between sessions, he sat in the hall by an ashtray and chain smoked cigarettes, talking to anybody who would come up to him. He couldn't have been a nicer guy.
Guys being dudes.
Chain smoking cigarettes and admiring their own work and saying, now that's a football play. You gotta love it.
God, I want a cigarette so bad right now.
Sometimes you draw up a play so good, that's the only natural response right after, you know?
Was it good for you too? Sorry.
It's on the back of those kind of sessions and the way in which Kempski is able to present these high-level concepts of the wing T offense in ways that can be easily digested by young players. If you know anything about high school football, you know that the wing T is still like the preeminent offense in the high school football game. Across the board, when you talk about like a Matter Day, sure, like a Matter Day is going to run more of a pro offense. IMG is going to run more of a pro offense. St. Joe's Prep. But when we're talking about our run-of-the-mill high school team, the wing T offense, universally, it's like your starter kit when you're a high school football player. And, I mean, why not? This is, again, a guy that we've said literally wrote the book. And I should say books because he has written 5 different books about the intricacies of the wing T offense and coaching in general. I mean, personally, like, I ordered this book, like, as I got halfway through this research. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to understand it at all, being so far removed from playing football. But, like, this seems like the closest thing we have to, like, a football playbook Bible.
You're just getting ready for, like, when you are childhood football team coach.
I'm going to be working on all kinds of crackback blocks. I don't care if it's flag football. Don't throw the block. Just run into his way and make him go around you. That's all you got to do.
No moving screens.
No moving screens. But, you know, as I said, he's generous with his knowledge and generous with his personality, but still incredibly loyal to Delaware and specifically to Tubby Raymond. That loyalty was returned in 2000 when Raymond promoted Kempski to the title of associate head coach. Nice little bump up, recognizing the importance that Ted has had to Tubby's success along the way. He would hold that post for the final 2 years of his collegiate career. Tubby would secure win number 300 towards the end of 2001 season, and he would afterwards retire with Ted following him right out the door. It just wouldn't have felt right to stick around. With that retirement, Delaware would move on to Casey Keeler, who would implement his offense, which is a no-huddle shotgun offense. And essentially, the wing T offense has fallen out of the college game at its highest levels since that retirement. But as we reflect on the many accomplishments of Delaware under Ted Kempski, 3 national championships, 7 national championship appearances, 16 postseason berths, and 8 conference titles. He's also been honored by just about every institution that you could imagine. In 2008, the American Football Coaches Association honored him with their Lifetime Achievement Award. And the AFCA is essentially, for those who don't know, it's like the union for all coaches. It's like the NFLPA, the NBAPA. There's this association. They honored Ted 7 years after he retired with that Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2010, he was named to the state of Delaware's Sports Hall of Fame. And in 2015, alongside, I'm just going to say on a personal note, my uncle, Bruce Fad, who played football and baseball at Delaware, Ted Kempski was inducted into the University of Delaware's Athletics Hall of Fame. If you are intrigued by the wing T hearing this presentation, you can buy any of the, again, 5 books that he wrote on the wing T offense. The preeminent one being the Delaware wing T in order of football, not a style of football, in order of football. You can buy that one that he co-authored with Tubby Raymond. You can also watch Navy football this season because a lot of people with more simple football mind, you might think, oh, Navy's been running like that kind of offense this whole time. No. Triple option offense is very different from the wing T offense. But if you know anything about Navy football, they've stagnated a little bit in the past few years. That triple option ain't optioning like it used to be. So their new offensive coordinator, Drew Dronick, has been on record this preseason as promising to introduce wing T concepts to the Navy triple option for the first time. I'm not saying all the plays are going to be wing T for Navy this year, but if you're looking for something at home, the bad ones are not wing T, and the good ones are wing T. That's how you can tell the difference.
Go fighting midshipmen.
Go fighting midshipmen. if you want to honor the wing T, there's a couple ways you can do that. But if you want to honor the man that took this fledgling offense, revolutionized it into the powerhouse that took Delaware to 3 national championships, there's only one thing you can do, and that's induct Ted Kempski into the Hall of God.
I feel the passion. I feel the Blue Hen passion coming through. I want to say that before I say anything else. Like, it rings true that one day old Diaz already knew ball.
It was instilled. And, like, honestly, I was going to games while I was in utero. I was probably gleaning some things there, too.
Yeah, that's why 1-year-old you knew ball. You'd already been inculcated during the pregnancy.
It was a nice little head start. But, look, I don't want to get a head start on just ushering Ted into the Hall. I know we have 2 more assistant coaches to discuss, and I can't wait to hear about them.
I would love to tell you about an assistant coach, and I think that you described a really beautiful relationship between the assistant and head coach there. And it's interesting to look at those 2 roles, because the only thing that it feels like really head coach is still such kind of a nebulous job very often. It's still just connotations of leadership and culture building. I feel like most of the time you hear assistant coach, you assume, all right, they got to be a guru at something. They got to be some kind of savant, some kind of specialist. And sure, some of those savants are at the head coaching level in the NFL. You've got Belichick and Reed's legacies as defensive and offensive masterminds. In baseball, I think you could go back a couple decades and point to Earl Weaver as a statistical mastermind. Diaz, someone you've talked about previously, someone who also wrote a book on their specialty. Herb McGee, there at Philly Textile, those 54 years of coaching, really with his book, Teaching the Art of Shooting, built the school of shooting, even though he was a head coach. But once you've got that school, other people are going to go get degrees. You're going to have other shot doctors, many of whom eschew the larger head coach role. They just kind of stay at that lower level. And one of those shot doctors, that's what I want to talk about today. One of these more modern ones who has, at just about every step, helped create a healthy atmosphere of shooting, has made a lot of house calls for players during this whole time, has really been an engine behind a lot of success at a number of different programs. And we simply have to, if we're talking about assistant coaches, discuss another shot doctor today. Assistant coach Chip Engelland.
The whole time you were giving the preamble, I knew that you were talking about the Spurs shooting coach, and I just couldn't remember his name. And then it was an itch got scratched as soon as you said
I
Chip
feel
Engelland.
like you're giving me great bona fides already, because he is the guy that's the Spurs shooting coach. We'll get to that later. First off, do you happen to know what Chip's real name is? Either of you. It's not Chip. I'll tell you that.
Chipper.
Diaz, you got a guess?
Go something crazy like Vontavious.
We are dealing with... he is white. We are dealing with one Arthur Edward Engelland. That is Chip, born Arthur Edward on May 9th, 1961 in Pacific Palisades, California. And it is a great time to be a Hoops fan there in LA, because you are right in the thick of the Wooden UCLA dynasty that we've talked about before, the one jump-started in many ways by Walt Hazzard, a Hall of Guy inductee. And this is the period where they win 10 championships in 12 years, including 7 straight, shattering the record that still today stands as second place of 2. Not only is this going on, Chip is actually a ball boy for that final title during that stretch in 1975 while he's entering high school at the very prestigious Palisades Charter High. And there's a number of basketball names here. For one, someone in his class that he dates is Jeannie Buss, high school sweethearts there for a little bit. Also, help me out with this name, Kiki Vandeweghe. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Kiki Vandeweghe, yep.
Vandeweghe, yeah. He is an upperclassman when we first have Chip enter Palisades Charter High. So they played together a little bit on the team. But by the end of his time there at high school, he is the unquestioned star. He leads all of Los Angeles in scoring his senior year. And this is going to end up getting him enough attention for a scholarship to Duke, where he will go on to play for the Blue Devils. Notably, as he exits, there is another star ready to swoop right in behind him, and that's Steve Kerr. So really a hotbed of basketball names here at Palisades Charter High in the mid-70s.
When I hear about stuff like that, I wonder if they were all Like, take them and just put them in like 5 different areas where none of them interact with each other. Like, was there some fuel that like helped elevate all of them at the same time?
Here's what I'll say.
Competition.
Who you know will be important in the story of Chip Engelland. Absolutely. When he gets to Duke, it is a good team with 4 NBA players on the starting lineup. You got Mike Kempski, Gene Banks, Vince Taylor, and Kenny Denard. With that, and with him being a freshman, not a whole lot of minutes per game. He's only getting 11.4 off the bench and only getting 4 points in that time. They go 24-9 with his minimal contributions. And they do, in the tournament, score a big win. They're a 4 seed, and they do get the upset over number 1 seeded Kentucky in the second round, but they do then lose in the Sweet 16 the very next round. So that's 79-80. The next year, there is another big new arrival to the Duke campus. Coach Bill E. Foster has wrapped up his time after 6 years there, had a really strong last 3. That was enough to get him a job at University of South Carolina. And so Duke is bringing in the head coach from West Point, Coach K. I did not realize how bad Coach K's first 3 years at Duke were, frankly. The team goes 38. Yeah, they go 38-47 over those first 3 years. Really not great. Engelland is still largely during this time going to be the 6-man, first guy off the bench, make some spot starts, but there are 2 notable things about his career here at Duke. One, as the years go on, increasingly better at shooting. He starts at about 46% from the field. He is regularly in the mid-50s the rest of the way from there. And his free throw shooting percentage in particular up to 89.1 to lead the team senior year. He also, despite this like 6-man role, he is a big leader on the team. He takes that leadership very seriously. And so despite only starting 8 games in his 24 played his senior year, he is one of the 2 captains along with Tom Emma. This is not enough for a pro career in the NBA, but it is enough for a pro career for Chip Engelland. I did not know about Chip Engelland's pro career. You guys want to guess where he goes?
Turkey.
Diaz?
Give me Brazil.
So Chip Engelland goes to what I've learned is the second oldest continuously operating professional basketball league in the world. And that is the PBA, or the Philippine Basketball Association, which was founded in 1975.
Fun.
They do fucking love basketball there.
They really do. And the team that he's on is, so they're technically a guest team in the PBA because these players very strictly are not pro. The Philippines is a little bit corrupt right now. Just like a hint, a smidge of corruption. No, it's like very openly corrupt. And they are basically like making this one company that is in bed with the government at the time employ a bunch of these players who then play on the company's amateur team. And a lot of them are able to become naturalized citizens who very importantly are able to then maintain amateur status for international play. And this is the Northern Cement basketball team. So he's going to have 2 years here with the Northern Cement team, which is very fun to say.
Go Cement, beat Pavement?
Yeah, fuck Pavement. Fuck Stephen Malkmus. No, I actually really enjoy Pavement. So Northern Cement basically serves as the Filipino national team during this time. He is not able to participate because of some of his naturalization problems in the 85 win at the Southeast Asian Games. But I believe he is part of the Asian Basketball Confederation Championship that they win that year. And then here's the big moment. This is like the peak of Chip Engelland's pro career. In 85, there's this tournament called the William Jones Memorial Cup, kind of like a Southeast Pacific goodwill games. The United States also participates, and the U.S. unsurprisingly makes it to the finals against the Philippines, who are led by none other than Chip Engelland. The game goes to overtime. Chip Engelland pours in 43 points of the 108 that the Philippines score, and the U.S. scores 100. The United States loses to the Philippines in this. It is like one of the crowning moments in Filipino basketball history, period. And Chip Engelland, with his overall just acumen in these 2 years here, he is colloquially known to the Filipinos as the machine gun. They love this machine gun. The thing is, the Filipino people do not love corrupt President Ferdinand Marcos and his machine guns. So following this, in 1986, there is the People's Power or the EDSA revolution that outs that president. And that kind of ends the sweet deal that the Northern Cement team had. There's no more corrupt money flowing to them.
Well, maybe they can come back now that Marcos Jr. is in charge of the Philippines.
Yep.
That's right. The Philippines had a president whose family stole billions from them, like literal billions, fled the country, and then to fight corruption, they just elected his son to become president, which is possibly the funniest thing ever.
I mean,
it's like if Trump literally stole billions, fled to Russia after the election, and then 20 years later, Barron Trump became president.
You're talking like that's not a completely possible thing.
Who knows better about the inner workings?
So, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. Chip could probably go back now, but he does return to the States. Though I just want to mention real quick, a lot of the cement team goes to the PBA's San Miguel beer team. Phenomenal. No. Association. Chip comes to the States, a bunch of non-NBA pro teams. He plays for the CBA's Topeka Sizzlers, the Columbus Horizon, the San Jose Slammers, and he also plays for the WBL, which is like the one where they had a height limit. Like you couldn't be a certain height or above to play in, and he is with the Calgary 88s in that. Until finally, in 91, he retires after a 9-year pro career. Now, even though this wasn't an NBA career, he's got the same question that every pro player has afterwards. That question is, what do we do after play? Pretty quickly, Chip settles on coaching, but not in like the typical, I'm going to work my way up as a sidelines coach. He, in 1993, opens up Chip Shots, his basketball shooting specific training camp, and starts really building this reputation, like not just for teaching the next generation, but being the person that the current generation starts to go to for help. And this is when a lot of that networking and the people who you know being important starts to come into play for a little bit. Because first off, in the 93-94 season, NBA vet Steve Kerr is in a bit of a slump, goes back home for a while and decides to go out to dinner with an old friend Chip. You know, they've kept in touch through their Palisades past. And they talk about a sore knee that Kerr mentions while they're at dinner. And he's like, look, if that's what's wrong, then I think all you need to do is like adjust this stance. He says this without seeing him shoot, just hearing them talk through it. And it like that works. Exactly what he tells Steve Kerr to do over dinner works. And so this just starts to grow this legend as he's still remaining independent, but getting more of these like connections to pros while still maintaining other connections he had as another networking thing comes up. Because in 97, 98, some dispute over exactly when, but during that general season, Coach K, who has gone on to some success by this point, has kind of built his whole brand off of sharpshooting white boys. But there are some other Duke vets that make the league. And Grant Hill is one of them in particular. Coach K sets Grant Hill up as he's starting to realize that while he can coast on a certain amount of athletic ability, if Grant Hill wants to have a long-term career, he's going to have to work on some of his fundamentals. So they put the two of them in touch, and it like is such a dramatic improvement for Grant Hill that he brings Chip with him to Detroit for the season to just keep working with him, to like be the personal shot consigliere. And this continues into 99-2000 when he finally gets an official NBA assistant coach job with the Detroit Pistons. And he's even all set to go with Grant Hill to Orlando following that change. But then an injury sidelines Grant Hill. And that kind of puts Chip in a spot where it looks like we're going to go back to Chip Shots for a little bit and kind of find ourselves out of the NBA maybe for a moment. Until once again, there is another alumni of his school who's found their way into the executive ranks. Kiki Vandeve is in Denver, the GM over there, and he is going to bring Chip Engelland to the Nuggets, where the new like project that he has here is improving the shots of big men to show that he can do it with like all kinds of different players. We've got Nene at this point. We've got Hall of Guy inductee Marcus Camby, and he's just working at these shots, making the Nuggets the first ever team in NBA history to go from a season with fewer than 20 wins to making the playoffs the next year. And just to like look at the change in shooting. Overall, the year before, 29th in the league, 41% from the field. They go up to 44. I know that doesn't sound like a lot. 3% is enough to get them all the way up to 11th in the league. Huge difference. And for the record, they were 9th in the league in free throw shooting the second season. That is compared to 29th the year before with a poor but nice 69.9. Another Western Conference team, though, sees this performance in Denver and realizes they can't let him stay out there. They need to try and pan this nugget of gold and get him on over. They've certainly experienced some recent success, but they know there is still yet untapped potential on their roster. And so in 2005, Chip Engelland joins the staff of the San Antonio Spurs. Chip has done a lot for the Spurs, but there are really the two projects, much like you focused in on your 3 Delaware quarterbacks. I want to focus on the 2 pupils at the Spurs that really had the biggest, most dramatic changes with Chip. And that first project, the one that is kind of waiting for him as he gets there, is Tony Parker, who, we should start by saying, at this point, he's already been a starter for 4 years, only 22. He's got 2 titles. Tony Parker's a great player at this point. But, nevertheless, like San Antonio looks at the roster, point guard is a space where they can improve. They'd had to bench Tony Parker down the stretch sometimes in those finals runs. And they'd even explored going out and getting Jason Kidd. So they're looking at point guard. But Chip comes in, he sees a couple things. He thinks we can work with Tony Parker here. The first things that they look at are the fact that Tony Parker actually had really good shooting off of the dribble, off the run. Just, it was his catch and shoot and his stationary shooting that was really suffering. And so they worked really hard to get the mechanics of his hand placement to remain the same when he was stationary in any capacity and receiving the ball to when he was working with the ball. And this, as well as basically eliminating the 3-point shot, because they looked at TP's shooting from deep and said, hey, that's bad. I want to improve your shooting, and in order to do that, we need to remove all the bad shots. And unfortunately for you, Tony Parker, all of your 3-point shots are bad shots right now.
You must be this strong to shoot threes. You are the little Frenchman.
Exactly. He's still 22. I don't even think he is Mr. Eva Longoria Parker yet at this point, let alone former Mr. Eva Longoria Parker. Immediately after these improvements, makes his first All-Star team. Shooting from 2-pointer goes up from 48 to 51. His overall shooting goes from 48 to 54 because of the overall reduction in the volume of threes as well. Free throw, 65-70. All of these are also not just one-year improvements. They're going to continue to trend up for the rest of Tony Parker's career. He is going to eventually become a finals MVP in their next run in 07. He's going to make 6 All-Star teams in many ways. Chip Engelland can take a lot of credit for making Tony Parker the Hall of Famer that he is now. Tony Parker, of course, made the adjustments. All credit to the player who's making the adjustments, but Chip Engelland had a lot to do with it. And he also had a lot to do with his other project, Kawhi Leonard, the Claw, the other one who came in really without that shooting tool. Acquired after the draft from Indiana. He's the 11th overall pick to the Pacers. They make this big trade because even though Kawhi had terrible college shooting, he just had every other tool you could want. Defense, rebounding, quote unquote effort. That was one that everyone said in the pre-draft workouts. And so the Spurs, they in particular saw this having immense upside because they figure, look, if the only tool that you don't have is shooting, at this point, we've had nearly a decade of Chip. We believe we have the person that can give you that one last tool. So Kawhi, just from his rookie season to 2014, sees his mid-range shooting go up 13.5%. It is no exaggeration to say by the time we get to 2014, he's the best player on that team. Goes on to be the cog, essentially, in the 2014 title-winning team. I think it's notable to point out the 2 finals MVPs for the runs he's been a part of, his 2 star pupils, really, Tony Parker and Kawhi Leonard. Look, Kawhi Leonard is also going to be a Hall of Famer. Maybe someone else could have unlocked that. A lot of credit goes to the player for making the adjustments, but these are 2 people that were not seen as stars necessarily when they came in. And Chip Engelland gave them the last tool that they needed to unlock what these 2 could be.
Well, and the biggest thing you can say for Chip Engelland is how textbook Kawhi's jumper is.
Mm-hmm.
There is no wasted motion with it. It is vertical jump. It is releasing at the top. It is guide hand, does not move from where it is until the release. And a pure follow through. And like, I got to see it, honestly, like at his height. I got to see it in game 3 of that Sixers Raptors series. Like the Sixers won by like 25, but they would have won by 50 if it wasn't for like Kawhi. I think had like 35 in that game on nothing but like back down, 20-foot cash. And that was like my main takeaway watching was like, this is just so mechanically perfect. Like it's not necessarily the prettiest shot, but in terms of mechanics and everything that a coach has ever told you to do, it's fucking beautiful. It's perfect.
It is exactly what Kawhi needed to become a perennial MVP candidate, multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards, along with just like 24 points per game, and you've got an all-timer. You've got those 2 star examples, but I also just want to like throw some names out there of guys who've had incredible shooting performances with the Spurs. You've got Danny Green, who for a while held the record for most threes in a playoff series. You've had the runs by guys like Patty Mills, Marco Bellinelli, Davis Bertans, and these are all guys who go on and continue to shoot for other teams. But I don't think it's an accident that a lot of these guys come to San Antonio and become sharpshooters and develop that reputation and then play off that reputation then for the rest of their careers very often. Like that kind of widespread shooting prowess, that coaching them up and then making them shine up and then move on. That is, I think, a really important thing. And like, that's something that Chip Engelland does. Also, is that something that Greg Popovich does, obviously, for all of his assistant coaches. The number of Spurs assistants that have gone on to be head coaches is absurd. You've got Ime Udoka, you got Becky Hammon, 2-time champion. You've got Mike Budenholzer, Monty Williams, you got Mike Brown, Taylor Jenkins, Quinn Snyder, Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr, when he became a head coach, tried to like hire Chip Engelland away from the Spurs. Steve Kerr, his longtime friend, knows this is the not so secret ingredient to the Spurs' just unprecedented run of success. People have a fast track to head coach if they serve alongside Greg Popovich as an assistant. Folks have come calling for Chip. Like Chip has been asked about it and he's turned them down. He has valued to some extent the flexibility that the Spurs have afforded him that have still allowed him to manage chip shots and help other players like one-on-one that reach out. He has continued to make house calls as the shot doctor. He has also finally moved on to the next challenge after the Spurs. He did switch teams in 2022. Do you guys know who he's with right now?
OKC.
He is with OKC. Somewhat amusingly.
I saw an article a couple months ago about how they credited Lou Dort being able to shoot to Chip Engelland. So
he fixed Lou Dort. A player that a lot of like articles say is super excited to work with Chip Engelland in OKC is Josh Giddey. So that's funny for reasons. But yeah, Chip Engelland is now helping fuel yet another young up-and-coming team. It should be mentioned that they jumped from 24th in the league in shooting that first season that he was there with them to, in this most recent one, 3rd, making 49.9%, nearly half of their shots from the field, with Chip Engelland helping them pour it in.
The idea of Alex Caruso becoming like a lethal 3-point shooter there is terrifying.
You need to make yourself comfortable with that reality, which is going to pass soon. Because like, I will acknowledge that as we typically talk about people who've moved on, like Chip, he's got some time to put another chapter in. But I do want to bring forward this guy that was, like I said, not a secret. Plenty of people are, towards the end of this tenure, doing write-ups. You know, there's multiple Grantland and Ringer pieces on him. There's a lot of talk when he went with the U.S. men's team to the Philippines for a tournament and was recognized as the machine gun, still beloved there for his shining moment. But he is like been one of the engines of success behind one of the preeminent model franchises in North American professional sports. And one thing that I want to go back to that I started with, the difference often between head coach and assistant coach is that an assistant coach is some kind of savant. And I want to acknowledge that Chip Engelland does not like the idea of being referred to as like a shooting guru. He doesn't like the label of just being a shooting coach. First and foremost, he does think of himself as a coach. Like I think many, if not all, assistant coaches do. So like, does he happen to have a specialty? Yes, but he doesn't think that diminishes his role or importance as a coach. And I agree with that. I don't think it makes him any less of a coach. I don't think he's any less of a guy. And so that is why he is my guy this week.
I love the idea with so far we have two very different types of assistant coaches. Like one who is hyper focused on the X's and O's and scheming to put people in a position to be able to execute. And then with Chip Engelland, we have an assistant coach who is so hyper focused on the specific minutia of the mechanics of the actions that are essential to the sport. So with those two in mind, I'm curious if there is yet a third type of assistant coach that I have not considered that Xavier's ready to talk about.
I guess we'll see, and hopefully my internet stays stable. Dear listeners, if you think that I've been kind of quiet on this, it's because power outages and bad internet. But I have been listening and paying attention, so don't worry about that. Real quick, I do want to give a shout out to Benoit Allaire, who is possibly the greatest goaltending coach of all time, and after 20 years of stepping down as the Rangers goaltending coach, but he's staying as the director of goaltending for the entire Rangers organization, so I thought he didn't quite fit this one. So with that being said, I pivoted to baseball, and I was struggling between two really interesting options, but I decided to go with one that I liked the best. So I want to tell you both about Charley Lau.
Is that like an Lough Lau?
Lau.
Lau.
Yes.
Just Lau?
Lau, that's it.
Okay.
So Charley Lau was born on April 12th, 1933 in Romulus, Michigan, right outside of Detroit. So close to having the best birthday, off by just one day, but it's okay, I can forgive him. Charley grew up playing baseball like people of that time, and Charley, a catcher, was signed by his hometown Detroit Tigers as an amateur free agent after high school. There was no draft at this point. He started in the minors in 1952, but his professional career was pretty much immediately interrupted because of the Korean War. And like many professional athletes of the time, he was sent to the military for the next 2 years before finally coming back in 1955. I don't know if this interruption is the reason for it, but when he returned stateside, he really struggled to break into the Tigers team. By the end of the 1959 season, he had only made 35 appearances and had just 13 hits. In October of 1959, former Tiger exec John McHale, who was now the general manager of the Braves, the Milwaukee Braves at this time, acquired Lau and pitcher Don Lee from Detroit for Casey Wise. He spends the entire 1960 season with the Braves as their primary backup catcher, but he hits 189 in 21 games. It starts a little more in 1961 because the Braves' primary catcher gets a shoulder injury. He actually catches a no-hitter from Warren Spahn that year. But still not hitting really well. He bats .207, gets sent to AAA Vancouver, and then he gets sold to the Baltimore Orioles on August 21st. This is Orioles legend Charley Lau.
Goddamn right it is.
He continues to be terrible from the plate. He hits 170 in 18 games for the O's at the end of the 61 season. In the offseason, Lau, now a career sub-200 hitter, his OPS plus was also sub-50. Like, he's really bad. Completely changes his batting stance. He changes to focus on just making contact. Totally different. And it works. With the O's in 1962, he has by far his best season yet. He hits .294 across 81 games with their backup. His OPS plus jumped from 14 to 113. So, pretty large jump there. He also becomes the Orioles' go-to pinch hitter. He hits .367 in pinch hit situations. Pretty good. Unfortunately, he then forgets to hit again in 1963, and the O's sell his contract to the Kansas City Athletics. But then he remembers how to hit, and hits .294 with the Athletics.
Fuck Kansas City.
After batting .271 through the first part of the 64 season, the O's bring him back They trade Wes Stock to bring him back to help them in the pennant race. They fall just short that season, but they transition him to full-time pinch hitter. And in 1965, he bats a career best 295. 1966, he has elbow surgery, misses almost 4 months, comes back near the end of the year.
Okay, good.
He appears in 18 games, all as a pinch hitter. He has 6 hits and 4 walks. Technically, his OBP was 600, and his OPS was 1,422 in that time. I know it's a limited sample size, but James, what happens in the 1966 season for the Orioles?
They commit an anti-Semitism against Sandy Koufax by beating the shit out of the Dodgers.
They do, and the problem is they're so good they don't use a pinch hitter at all during the World Series.
They don't need it. They got Frank Robinson, baby!
So Charley Lau does count as a World Series champion. He just never appears in any of the games. But he's still on there. He still gets the win. I think all of us would take that if we were in the same position. After this season, bounces around a bit for a year, but retires pretty quickly after that. But he doesn't stay retired for long, because in 1969, he gets hired by the O's as a bullpen coach. Not surprising, former catchers make pretty good coaches, as I'm sure we've all seen across the ages. After 1 year in Baltimore, he becomes the first base coach for the Oakland Athletics. Kansas City Athletics have recently moved to Oakland. After 1 year in Oakland, he gets fired by Charlie Finley, who, as we know, is a weird dude. He has a wild press conference where he announces the firing of manager John McNamara, but then during it also tries to ruin the reputation of Charley Lau by falsely insinuating that Charley Lau was sleeping with a player. He used the phrase "sleeping with," of this player. In actuality, the backup catcher and Charley Lau both made no money because salaries were so shit under Charlie Finley. They had to share an apartment just to get by. Charlie Finley knew that, but he still tried to intimate to all the reporters that they were in a homosexual relationship in order to ruin Charley Lau's reputation. And then he fired him. So, weird time, but the Oakland A's loss was the gain of their old city, because he immediately gets hired by the new Kansas City Royals as their hitting coach. Sorry, James. It's all right, though. I promise. So it's, a bit funny for a career 255 hitter to be in charge of teaching others how to hit. But Lau is really good with the Royals. He later said that his deficiencies as a player helped him as a coach. Quote, "Some of us who weren't good hitters studied the game so hard that maybe we learned something extra. I wasn't much of a player, but if they say I've been successful as a teacher of hitting, then when I have done, I'll be proud to leave that legacy."
Well, people said that Barry Bonds was reportedly just not a good hitting coach with my Yankees. He'd just be like, I don't know, hit it better. Just beat the shit out of the ball. It's also funny that he's looked at as not a good hitter with a 255 average, which would be perfectly respectable today.
Yeah, I mean, averages are shit right now. I think the MLB average is 240 this season, I think.
You can make a career with a 255 average.
It's the least hits per game since the dead ball era, essentially.
It's bad. But back to Charley Lau. The season before he joined, the Royals as a team hit 244. In each of his first 3 seasons, they improved pretty significantly to 250, then 255, then 261. One of the more famous stories from his time in Kansas City was that a young George Brett made his debut in 1973 and hit 125. He earned a starting job coming into the 74 season, but still struggled at the plate. He went to Lau specifically for personalized help, and the two spent the entire All-Star break fixing Brett's swing. He recovered to hit 282 that season, and then obviously we know what happened with George Brett for the rest of his career. Yeah. Later in life, Brett said, "Charlie was a guy who took me when I was just an extra utility player It made me into an everyday player. He said, you've got to start going to left field a little more. Will you put the time and effort it's going to take? After some experimentation and refinement, we came up with a stance and hitting approach for me that worked. And little did I realize at the time what it was going to do and how it was going to change my life. So George Brett owes his entire hitting career to Charley Lau. Lau actually briefly gets fired in 1974 by manager Jack McKeon, who didn't like him. Imagine the guy who turns around George Brett, you fire because you don't like him. But the players all liked Lau more than McKeon. So then McKeon gets fired and they bring Lau back as hitting coach, which is very funny. The Royals make the playoffs for the first time ever in 1976, hitting .269 as a team. So up 2-5 from the year before Charley Lau was hired. They missed the World Series by 1 game that season. Next year, improve again to .277, also missing the World Series by 1 game. Next year, they also hit in the 270s, make the ALCS for the 3rd straight time, but lose yet again, unfortunately.
I'm going to say unfortunately. Not necessarily unfortunately.
Unfortunately for Charley Lau. How about that?
Right,
He's got a Baltimore ring. We're good. We're good with Charley Lau.
All right, that's fair.
And like, I mean, honestly, James, like, this is great sleeper cell work that Charley Lau's doing for you, bringing the Royals, making them just good enough to think that they can win.
Because no one would suspect him being responsible at that point. This is excellent. This is excellent deduction on your part, Diaz.
So it's enough to talk about, the success that the Royals had, but it's also important to know how Charley Lau did this. He developed what he called the absolutes for hitting. This is essentially like a bullet point list of things that you have to have. A balanced, workable stance. Rhythm and movement in the stance instead of standing still. A good weight shift from a firm, rigid backside to a firm, rigid front side. Striding with the front toe closed. Having the bat in the launching position as soon as the front foot touches down. Making the stride in a positive, aggressive motion towards the pitcher. A tension-free swing. Hitting through the ball. And hitting the ball where it is pitched rather than trying to direct it. That was the key that he had for all of the hitters. He also was one of the first to institute the use of videotape in working with Royals hitters. So he would spend hours reviewing the tape to try to help people adjust their stances. Like, he's essentially revolutionary in this way of personalized, like, teaching for hitters. After 1978, he moves to the Yankees for 3 years as they make the ALCS in 1980 and the World Series in 1981, losing both. Don't worry, James. The Orioles ring is still his only World Series ring. But he helps turn the White Sox around because they made the playoffs in 1983, their first appearance in 24 years. White Sox manager at the time, Tony La Russa, credited Lau with helping to refine the swing of Ron Kittle, who ended up winning Rookie of the Year in 1983. Essentially, everywhere this guy goes, he helps people hit.
And once again, he is a sleeper agent taking down the Chicago White Sox in the 1983 playoffs as the Baltimore Orioles win another World Series.
You know what? He has done so much for the city of Baltimore and the Orioles. It is incredible work. Unfortunately, Lau is unable to help the White Sox improve or act as a sleeper agent for the Orioles again because he does pass away from cancer in March of 1984. The White Sox haven't officially retired it, but no player has worn Lau's number 6 since his passing. So 40 years. So it's like unofficially retired. After his death, Jerry Reinsdorf said that there was no question Charley was regarded as the best in all of baseball at teaching the craft of hitting a baseball. Tony La Russa said, in my opinion, he was a genius. He was able to work with anyone, a veteran or a rookie. Lou Piniella called him the greatest batting instructor of them all. And Joe Rudy, 3-time All-Star member of 3 World Series champions and Athletics Hall of Famer, said that meeting Lau was the turning point of my career. And
damn, man, imagine if the Athletics 3-peat team also had this dude.
Yeah, they're very lucky that his 1 year there, he taught their catcher how to be really good. But even with his untimely early death, Lau's teachings do live on. In 1980, he published a book, an instructional video set titled The Art of Hitting 300, which is still read and distributed pretty widely. Retrospectively, Lau is also considered the first celebrity hitting coach, in that players would seek him out personally for lessons in the offseason. Like Reggie Jackson would come to him for lessons. And his son, Charley Lau Jr., has taken up his father's mantle and kind of refined his dad's techniques. He's put out multiple books called Lau's Laws on Hitting and the 5 Most Common Flaws in the Swing. He's created his own hitting school. And he actually, one of his prize students was Mariners A-Rod, who hit 232 in his first season before coming to Charley Lau Jr.'s school, and then hitting 360 the next year.
Now, okay, this is the son. So yeah, this isn't any sleeper agent stuff by Charley Lau, because that making A-Rod good is pretty unforgivable.
No, that's Charley Lau Jr., but he also apparently mentored Pujols too. But that's more talking about just the fact that Charley Lau, despite not being around for the past 40 years, his philosophy on hitting is still a thing utilized by professionals today. It's been refined a little bit by his son, but I looked at the book. There are reviews from this year of people reading The Art of Hitting 300, which is wild for a hitting book from 1980. The instructional video is also great because it is the most 1980s-ass instructional video shot on a camcorder ever, with Charley Lau in the background teaching high school students and a old white guy narrator standing in front of the camera doing a narration while you see Charlie in the background doing the actual stuff. And it's just beautiful to look at. But yeah, I just love the idea of the first real hitting coach being a guy who could not hit and then just taught himself how to do it randomly, then realized, oh wait, what I figured out is so good, I'm going to become the greatest hitting coach of all time.
I love that wave of guys in that time period. I think we've discussed before, some of the coaches that were the first to bring video replay. And it really is just hey, right place, right time. You just happen to be the first guy that was a coach with a camcorder who had a light bulb go over your head. But hey, someone still has to be the first to do it. Credit to him for doing it. And credit to him for taking a career of self-improvement to reach replacement level and using that amount of effort to turn other people from replacement level into stars.
We have 3 very interesting guys to talk about. Who wants to start?
Well, you did end up with kind of not a repeat in any kind of negative connotation, but as Diaz was saying, a third type of guy. We didn't really have a third type of coach. We had a second specialty coach, a second coach really working and honing in on one part of the craft of the sport. So in that way, we do kind of have a separation between those two and Kempski. I don't know that separation means anything, but that is perhaps a starting point, a jumping off point.
Right. I mean, to me, I don't think it affects the way that I look at all of them, because if I was to say that one or the other should impact the decision, then I'd be saying that one or the other is more important to a good team. And I think that's not true. I think it takes both. So to me, that specific subsection is not a pro or a con either way for any of them.
Well, I'm sure that Engelland would look at Lau and say, no, that's not a hitting coach necessarily. That is a coach who happens to work at hitting. But I mean, if I'm going to be pumping up Chip, I got to also pump up that message and give Lau his flowers. And give Kempski his flowers. I think, the only thing I have against Kempski, it should be acknowledged that if we're being strict to the category, we do have by the end of it an associate head coach. Borderline.
It's more of an associate to the head coach.
Look, it's when we're trying to create separation at the top, you got to look at the little things.
For sure. I guess just one more thing, because I want to make sure I can articulate at least one of the very specific advancements that Ted Kempski brought to the Wing T offense. Because again, My claim with him is not that he created the Wayne T offense. My claim is that he perfected it. And the one thing that the offense didn't feature until he became Tubby Raymond's offensive coordinator was pre-snap motion at the snap, and those kind of things. Like, those concepts really weren't incorporated at all until Kempski, and the first 2 years that he added them was 71 and 72 when Delaware wins those back-to-back national championships. So again, like, it's so, like, I'm far from an expert in football X's and O's, so I don't want to get super caught up in like specific terminology, but like I feel like that's at least one that we can all recognize and, you know, appreciate for him incorporating into the offense.
Sure, like, I mean, if I have to ding my guy Chip, if I got to ding him, he, to my knowledge, does not have a published book, as the other two clearly do. Like, he does not have that writing. He doesn't have, I guess, the kind of like advancement that a Kempski does. I don't even know if we could say that Lau has that kind of like leap forward. He's just, they're both, Chip and Lau represent, it seems like, refinement of a certain art, whereas Kempski is like also refining it, also adding to this, but adding to a structure rather than a mechanical thing. That being said, I mean, I'm really hard in the tank for Chip. Part of it is because, I mean, Diaz, you led off with what kind of feels like a really strong piece of evidence to me. You know that the Spurs had a good half of that run with that one shooting coach that just took care of everything, just fixed these guys, and that everyone else in the league came to. You know, maybe you knew the name, maybe you didn't. In this case, you didn't at that time. I'm sure you heard before. I'm not trying to besmirch your ball knowledge. As we've said, from day one, you have known ball.
It was the scratching of the itch to finally hear, oh yeah, Chip Engelland. That's what it was.
And that scratching of the itch, I mean, like, that feels like your bar test. I also I love reading about how minute the changes that he really like works on with players are, how tiny adjustments in like hand placing on the ball for shooting form and the small like foot adjustment. It is fascinating to see the amount of difference those can have. And I know that's happening in every sport, but there is something about like, yeah, move your left thumb a half inch this way. Yeah, it feels different to finger placement in baseball when it's such a tiny thing. Like, you have to navigate the entirety of a ball with your two hands. And I just loved reading about Chip doing that. I'm pretty hard in the tank for Chip Engelland.
I do like that, and I do like the minutia of like mechanics trainings. I mean, one of the things with Charley Lau was with his like hitting training, it was a lot of finishing swings by releasing the top hand off the bat to get further extension, which was the thing that was criticized like pretty heavily. Like, how are you going to hit one-handed? Not realizing that if you're a righty, having your left hand in, if you release it, you're able to extend your right arm more fully.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I do like that. I do like basketball mechanics. The one thing I'll say about Chip Engelland is that he is a current assistant coach for a very good team. It would not surprise me if he got an opportunity to at least interview for a head coach position.
That's fair. He's made it pretty clear he's not like, he's had several opportunities to interview for head coach positions, and he has continued to turn them down.
That's fair. If JJ Redick is becoming a head coach, I imagine some point someone is going to be like, we will give you a lot of money to come be our head coach. You don't even have to do half the coach stuff, but teach them to shoot, please. Just don't be Drew Hanlon, because Drew Hanlon makes me hate shooting coaches, because that guy is one of the most annoying people on the internet.
Well, like, if you want to ding Chip for still being the most active of these three, by being the only like really active one, totally get that. I am definitely seeing this like as a Spurs fan with what seems to me like the major chapter of his life having kind of moved on to the next. And who knows? I mean, if time is any indication, if the OKC Thunder win the finals, it sounds like Lou Dort's probably going to be finals MVP after Chip Engelland fixed him and turned him into a incredibly effective player. But I just got to arrive. I will crash on a plane if I'm going to crash alone for Chip Engelland. But I'm just all in.
Diaz, I know ball is life for you, but what are you thinking?
So, I mean, if I was going to ding my own guy a little bit, what I would say is with Chip Engelland and Charley Lau, we see that they are an assistant coach generally. Like they bounce across to different teams. They spread their knowledge far and wide, and they are employed by multiple places. Whereas with Ted Kempski, we do have the brief foray to Virginia as a player. We have the brief detours to George Washington and Marshall of Virginia. But by and large, like, he's a Delaware guy, and specifically, like, he's Tubby Raymond's guy.
It's a symbiotic relationship where, like, he's absolutely the assistant coach. Like, Tubby Raymond's the head coach, but he is an elevated assistant coach.
Right. Yeah, I guess, like, that would be my, if I was going to look for something to ding Ted Kempski on, it's exactly that he is specifically a Delaware guy. If he had gone to, like, if he goes from doing this at Delaware to then going to, like, say, Alabama and wins a couple national titles on the biggest stage there as an offensive coordinator, then I think he would have become, like, the runaway vote in this section. But
and I'm not even, like, docking him for staying at Delaware. Like, it's nothing about staying in the environment. It's about the fact that as long as he remains there with Tubby, he just, like, has a role that is different from the average assistant coach role. Like, it's nothing about that. He could go to, like, a tiny school. You go to a Marshall and have this kind of stuff succeed there. Like, I don't think he has to do it on a big stage.
Right. But it's like, while I can draw the lines in the sand and say, yeah, Tubby was more of the head coach and Kempski was more of the cigarette chain smoking mastermind raving over an overhead projector, the only evidence we have for that is the stories that are told. I don't have seasons to point out and say, yeah, well, look at these 6 years when he was at this other school, it was just as effective. So that being the case, I don't know. It is tough for me to just, like, throw in the hat and give up on Ted Kempski, because we did start this episode with some pretty bad Delaware disrespect.
Delaware has been disrespected for sure.
Pretty severe Delaware disrespect. But, and I mean, yeah, like, I'm waffling everywhere because I love Chip Engelland, but then I also love learning about this fucking hitting guy that has this dorky video from 1980 that people still watch.
One thing I do want to say real quick, just, this isn't to sway anything, this is just funny, but I didn't have a place to put it in during my presentation. Charley Lau was in one Hollywood movie ever, the year before he died. The movie was called Max Dugan Returns. In this movie, he teaches one of the main characters how to hit. His father, like, pays him to, like, teach his son how to hit. The kid he teaches how to hit was Matthew Broderick, making his film debut. This movie was also the film debut of Kiefer Sutherland, because the main character was Donald Sutherland.
R.I.P. Donald, god damn.
So this was the film debut of Charley Lau, Matthew Broderick, and Kiefer Sutherland. And he literally plays himself getting paid to teach Matthew Broderick how to hit a baseball.
It's good. And I will say, credit to Mr. Lau, that when the casting call went out for a hitting coach, they knew where to turn. So I'll give full credit there. That being said, I think if we found ourselves in a similar situation with basketball, I think Chip Engelland would be number one on that call sheet if you put out that casting call.
Did they have a shooting coach in Hustle? Did they have someone do that? Was Chip Engelland in Hustle? Did Adam Sandler call him up?
I just gotta say, the best thing, I shouldn't say the best thing, the thing that Hustle gets the most accurate is this type of player absolutely gets squandered by the Sixers and goes to the Celtics and torments us. That is 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm sorry, spoilers if you haven't seen it already, but yeah, the main dude, after he gets trained up by Adam Sandler, goes sign with the Celtics. the movie ends there. Presumably, he wins 10 championships and like 5.
He beats the
games at
Sixers in the
Buccaneers
second round every year.
every single year. Oh my god! But yeah, to your point, no shooting coach of note in Hustle.
We have to make our own movie and hire Chip Engelland as the shooting coach.
The title's already there. Chip shots. Easy.
Well, we have to pay him extra if we use that as the title.
No, it's going to be like a basketball Bad News Bears. They did it for baseball. They did it for hockey with Mighty Ducks. We're making chip shots. Book it. RTG Productions, coming to a theater near you 2025.
The newest release on RTG Plus.
We're getting the exact same budget that the Kansas City Chiefs Hallmark movie is going to get.
God.
Did you not see that's happening?
No, I didn't, but...
Yeah, that's happening. It's an official deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. But enough about that bullshit town of Kansas City. I'll make my last pitch for Chip Engelland, and then we'll let the chips fall where they may. So much of this, like, yes, he's a great shooter. He is the machine gun. But I do love the amount of his story that is something that comes up in assistant coaching a lot. I mean, this has been a discussion in a negative way because of how it has kept the coaching ranks insular about how important it is about who you know. And this is a guy that gets to be a ball boy for John Wooden and talks about how much that like influences his detail-oriented process. He dates Jeannie Buss. Doesn't do anything with the Lakers later, but like just one more time, he dates Jeannie Buss in high school. Hysterical. He will not talk about it in interviews.
Yeah, he fumbled that one pretty bad. Like that. I don't know if that's a positive.
I think Chip Engelland's done just fine for himself, not being associated with the Los Angeles Lakers.
But he could be also extremely, extremely rich.
Well, hey, good thing that he knew Steve Kerr and was able to help him out. Good thing that he knew Coach K and was able to get put in touch with Grant Hill. Good thing that he knew Kiki and was able to get brought into Denver. Like, while this is sometimes a negative for the overall associate head coaching ranks, is it not incredibly assistant head coach that this guy's career was very much made by networking and being like an incredibly good shooter?
So I think all three of us are pretty strong in camp for our own guys. I'll be the bigger person, and I'll choose to be the tiebreaker. So that leaves us with Chip Engelland and Charley Lau. Although Ted Kempski, let it be said, should not be disrespected, nor should the state of Delaware.
Ted Kempski is by a wide margin the greatest associate head coach that we have discussed today.
By far, he is number one, but the category is not associate head coaches. It is assistant coaches. So we focus on these two masters of their craft. And I gotta say, the tiebreaker for me is being in the same movie in which Matthew Broderick made his debut. So,
that's where the chips fall.
It was a story that contained a lot of the elements that we love to circle back to. We have the low talent player that makes the most out of what they have. We have the person who spreads the seeds of their wisdom to others. We have the person whose life is unfortunately cut tragically short. And we do have the best hitting coach, if not in the history of baseball, then certainly in the history of this hall. Without further ado, Charley Lau, welcome to the Hall of Guy.
Welcome to the Hall of Guy, Charlie. Chip, I'm sorry. It is who you know, and this time you didn't know enough of us. So hopefully OKC can take another one of your proteges to a perch. But we have taken you all here to the end of this, and it has been great to have you all here. And all of it is thanks to a couple people, producer Craig and all the coders behind him, our musical director Don Ham, responsible for that lovely theme music, and the two guys that I do this with. We love remembering other guys with you all. If you want to continue to remember guys with us between episodes, you can always find all the information about the show at bit.ly/rememberthatguy. Hey, if you follow us on Blue Sky, you would have been able to spend all day today getting the live updates about Katie Pumphrey's swimming exploits. So another incentive to maybe check us out. But that's all I've got for us right now. R.I.P. Donald Sutherland, I guess. That's the person who was cut down tragically before their time that we were talking about, right? Taken from us too soon?
Nichols, not a lot, but crazy that it's happened, et cetera, et cetera.
Anyway, that's all I've got. Anything from you guys this week?
Yeah, one last thing. Slovenia and Denmark ended up having to use the 9th and final tiebreaker to decide who finished second and who finished third today in their Euro group. They had the same number of points, same number of goals. They drew against each other. They had the same disciplinary record, so the exact same amount of yellow cards. So the last thing was highest position in the European qualifiers, so the qualifications for the Euros, where they were actually in the same group and had the same amount of points. But Denmark finished first by nature of them drawing one game and Denmark winning the other one 2-1. So it went down to tiebreakers of the last tiebreaker.
And that's like, it's crazy to think that was basically accomplished by a game, 4 or 5 months ago?
Yes, it was, we
didn't do well enough almost half a year ago, guys.
Yes, it was a very long time ago. It was, let's see, November of 2023. Yeah, so 7 months ago, that game.
Just imagine, like, the message in the Slovenian locker room afterwards where it's like, damn, all right, look, enough to get through, but don't worry about it, boys. I know we would have liked to finish higher, but everything resets once we get to Euro. Except it doesn't.
7 months later. That's absurd. You will not have to wait 7 months for the next episode. We will be back next week with another one. But until then, folks, I've been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And with last night's result in Florida, we can confirm for another year. Still pronounced Guy, not Kid. I'm so sorry, I forgot his name.
Charley Lau.
You know whose name you didn't forget?
I almost want to give it
You know
to
whose
James
name I
because of
bet
that.
you still remember? You know what guy I think you remember?
I kind of feel bad now.
No,
gonna.
It's the first time I ever heard of Charley Lau, and I'm too busy being under the influence of podcast-enhancing drugs and rambling.
The true PEDs.